Today I want us to talk about what I consider to be the most loaded verse in the Bible. And by loaded I mean that which has the most meaning and which tells us most in just a small few words. And it is, today you will be with me in paradise. That's the most loaded verse in the entire Bible, and when you think about where that comes from, when Jesus was crucified, it says he was crucified with two thieves on each side. And at some point up there, one of them started making fun of him, and the other one said, "You shouldn't do that. We're here because we deserve it, and he has done nothing wrong." And then he turned to Jesus and he said, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." So I wanted to talk about that today and go roundabout way and find out exactly why it is so loaded. And to start with that, I want to think about death. We live in a society that wants to avoid death at all costs. It seems like there's no cost, either financial or in human suffering, that we're not willing to bear in order to forestall death just a little. We spend trillions of dollars every year on what we label health care. Much of this is not as much focused on health as it is on extending life, even for a few weeks. Our nursing homes, hospice houses, and intensive care units are full of pitiful blobs of human beings that are what remain after we have used all of the medical arsenal in an attempt to keep them from dying. Now, although we may say that we believe in eternal life, our actions indicate that deep down inside us we have the fear that when our physical bodies die, we will cease to exist. I've noticed over the years that among the people I knew who were facing death, the ones who were, on the surface at least, most religious, were no less likely to do everything possible to forestall death than people who did not believe in God. In fact, I've noticed over the years that a lot of times it is those who are Christians who will do the most to postpone death. I don't know if that's true across the board, but it certainly has been true in my experience. And why is that so? Why are the most religious among us oftentimes the ones who will do whatever they have to do to forestall death? Whether we realize it or not, we have grown up in a Christianity that tells us to look at things as if our physical body is the most important. And we have done that. And the reason we have grown up like that has to do with science. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, science was telling us that everything that exists is made up of little hard bits of matter called protons, neutrons, and electrons. And they told us that that's all there is to everything. They told us that we are nothing but a collection of atoms. At death, we cease to exist. They told us that nothing exists that's not made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons. And they said that everything you think is spiritual is nothing but a hallucination. And those hallucinations are produced by chemical reactions and electrical impulses in your brain. They told us that religion is something we made up to satisfy deep-seated psychological needs. And oddly enough, in spite of all the talk about things spiritual, and in spite of the so-called controversies between science and religion, Christianity actually accepted most of what science said, and Christianity itself began acting as if physical reality is the only reality that exists. All parts of Christianity have not completely accepted science's view that religion is something we made up. Not yet. But overall, Christianity has accepted science's concentration on the physical. This acceptance defines Christianity in the 20th century and beyond. It defined the directions Christianity would take in the 20th century. And there were two directions that Christianity took in the 20th century. It aligned itself and placed itself under modern medicine, and it became enmeshed in social work. In other words, Christianity became the hornblowers for the pharmaceutical industry, and it became concentrated on this life and helping people in this life. All of us, no matter what denomination we grew up in a very worldly version of Christianity. And I don't mean worldly in a pejorative sense. I mean worldly in the sense of a Christianity that places its emphasis on our life here and now. Christianity became concentrated on improving people's lives in the here and now. Church activities today. Think about what church activities are. Political activism, things related to health care, community projects, building and repairing houses, disaster relief, getting school supplies, soup kitchens, food pantries, clothes closets, providing entertainment for youth groups, providing entertainment for the elderly, providing entertainment at Christmas. And of course, there's nothing wrong with helping people. Jesus himself told us to help those in need, and he placed a lot of emphasis on it. But Jesus also said that life is more than food, and the body is more than clothing. And somehow or another we have to put those two together. And that's something that we haven't done. The point is that from both sides, from both science and religion, we grew up in a society that concentrates on the physical realm, on this life. So how could we avoid getting the idea that Christianity is mainly about life here on earth now? How could we avoid seeing our own life as nothing but our time here on earth? If you grow up with the concentration from both science and Christianity that your life is right here, this is you, then how can you help but think that? Who am I? I'm right here. I'm touching myself. This is me, my physical body. When this dies, I will cease to exist. You see, we've heard that from both science and Christianity. And from that we got the fear. Deep down inside us, maybe it's so deep we haven't consciously realized it, but it's there. We got the fear that when this body dies, we will cease to exist. You know, I've heard people talk about how years ago they used to go to churches and hear the preacher stand up screaming and stomping and sweating and all, warning them about hell. We don't do that anymore. Modern Christians aren't afraid of going to hell. Modern Christians are afraid that when they die, they'll cease to exist. So we have replaced the emphasis on hell, and we have suddenly given people the idea that this is all you got right here. And when this is gone, you're going to. You see, how we think about death is determined by how we think about life. How we define death is determined by how we define life. You see, death only makes sense when compared to life. If I view life as equating me with this body right here, then the death of my body will indeed be the end of it all. But if I look at me as something different than this body, then the death of my body doesn't have to be such a traumatic thing to look forward to. In the Greek manuscripts of the New Testament, there are two main words that relate to understanding what life is. And from those words, we see that the Bible does not see life as coming from the physical world at all. From the biblical perspective, the elements found on life, the atoms and molecules, the elements found here on earth, cannot, no matter how they're combined, create life. From a biblical perspective, life exists in the spiritual realm of God, and it is breathed in to the physical realm. From a biblical perspective, God injects, so to speak, two different kinds of life in our bodies. Both of these come from the spiritual realm. They do not exist as physical entities. There is nothing in the physical world that you can combine and get life. It has to be injected from the spiritual. The first kind of life God injects in us is the general kind of life. It is the energy that animates our bodies. It makes our body processes function. It's what makes us move and our bodies live and breathe. That is called pneuma in the Bible. It is seen to be coming through the wind and through the air. And it is what animates our bodies and gives our bodies life. But there is a second thing that God injects into us. We can think of it as a specific kind of pneuma unique to each individual, and that is the life energy that makes you a unique person. It's the life energy that makes everybody different, and that is what the Bible calls the soul. The soul, you see, is me as an individual. It is me as I exist as a unique person. And that word soul is often used in the Bible interchangeably to mean persons and to mean life. You see, when you take all the different New Testament usages of that word together, you see that they equate the soul with the person. The biblical writers do not talk about people by referring to their bodies. They talk about people by referring to their souls. What a person is, then, is the spiritual part of them, known as the soul. Human beings possess something called consciousness. No one really knows what consciousness is. We define it simply by what it results in. Consciousness is my awareness that I exist. It is my awareness that I exist as a unique individual, as a separate living thing. And think about that. When you look out into the world, what do you see? You see a group of individual things. Maybe it's people, maybe it's animals, maybe it's trees, maybe it's clouds, or whatever. That's consciousness that makes you know you're separate from all that. Think about when you go out and you look at a beautiful sunset. Your brain just doesn't register the colors. You see it, you feel it, you experience something. It moves you. That's your consciousness. Consciousness puzzles scientists. They have no idea where it comes from. They have no idea how it works. They don't know how to explain it. And the ones who insist upon believing there is nothing in the world but atoms and molecules are at a loss to explain it. They cannot explain consciousness by what they know about how the brain works. But we get the idea from the Bible that our consciousness arises from our soul. The Bible indicates that the life of our soul does not arise from anything here on earth. It arises from God. And it is injected into us by God. We are, in other words, spiritual creatures here, living in physical bodies. The Bible indicates that our soul exists independently of our physical body. It inhabits our physical body, but is not dependent upon our physical body. Our consciousness, our awareness, our sense of existence as unique individuals does not depend on the existence of our physical body. from my perspective at this time, I am located in my physical body, but this is not who I am. My consciousness is not here. It comes from the spiritual realm. And I know this sounds strange, it sounds foreign, because we've been taught by both science and Christianity to think of me as being this body, that I am right here in my body. If this body ceases to exist, then I may very well cease to exist too. But the Bible indicates that the soul does not depend upon the body to exist. In no sense do I exist merely as a collection of atoms and molecules. That's what we get when we dig into the New Testament and look at the words used there. Now, it is true that Christianity does emphasize the resurrection of the body. If you're familiar with the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed, you know that one says, I believe in the resurrection of the dead. And the other says, I believe in the resurrection of the body. But that does not mean in any way that the body is necessary for life. The idea of the resurrection of the body in Christianity means that we're just not computer robots programmed by some universal life source. The idea of the resurrection of the body in Christianity is there to tell us that when we die, we don't just float off into some universal consciousness and become one with the universe. The idea of the resurrection of the body is in Christianity to make sure that we know that each one of us as individuals lives forever. When we first started, we talked about Jesus on the cross. Today you will be with me in paradise. That statement right there disconnects you from your physical body. Because that thief on that cross was going to die. He was going to be taken down off of that cross and his body was going to be put somewhere. But Jesus said, you will be with me in paradise. See how that disconnects you from your body? That's what Jesus was saying right there. You are not your physical body. You do not depend on your physical body. In Romans 7, Paul wrote, who will deliver me from this body of death? Notice he says, who will deliver me from this body of death? You see what he's doing? He's disconnecting me with his body. He is something separate from his body. He is something inside his body, but not dependent upon his body. And you see what Paul says here actually leads us to say, well, the death of your body is not something that destroys you. It actually can be seen as something that sets you free. About the only Christians today who talk much about the soul are the ones who still go into the hellfire and damnation stuff, and that's very few. That type of Christian has just about died out. But even that kind of Christianity doesn't really concentrate on the soul, it just concentrates on hell. We don't see much concentration on the spiritual side in Christianity today. About the only time we see it is in connection with self-help stuff and pop psychology. And they really don't talk about it in the context of your life being actually independent of your body. That's why I said earlier that we have grown up in Christianity that concentrates on the physical body. And you know, it's actually from that kind of Christianity that we get the phrase life after death. I don't know if you noticed or not, but in our opening prayer was the phrase life after death. The view that the phrase life after death comes from a kind of religion that concentrates primarily on the physical body. The phrase life after death contains the idea in there that you are synonymous with your physical body. It, in essence, places the physical body as primary, because just from that very phrase, it leaves open the possibility that the death of the body is the end. The attitude that is conveyed by life after death is your life here and now. The life of your physical body is you. That is you. When your body dies, you'll die. But maybe you'll have the hope that something will be there. That's what life after death implies. But if you take the biblical notion, life after death is meaningless because there is no death of you. There is only the death of your physical body, but that has never been you. If I look at my life and I look at me as something that does not depend upon this physical body, then I see death only as a transition. I don't in any way see it as an end. Death becomes only about a fact of a bunch of atoms and molecules falling apart and nothing more, because it doesn't affect me. In Romans chapter 8, Paul says, if we live for the Lord. If we die for the Lord. So whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. You see how he's saying death makes no difference? That's what he's saying. Death makes no difference. Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Wouldn't it be nice to be truly rid of the fear that when our body dies, we'll cease to exist? Wouldn't it be nice to be able to really live today and really live without an ominous fear hanging in the back of our mind that it will one day end? I believe that's what Christianity can offer us. If we can quit looking down on earth all the time and start looking up. Today you will be with me in paradise. That old body that's going to die on the cross will be in the grave, but you will be with me in paradise. Think about what that means and about how different that is from how people today view life.